With Hip Over 50. So today I'm going to continue my series on why would an American want to move to the UK. I've already talked about climate and health, and today I'm going to talk about safety. So I'm Tessa. I am talking about and sharing with you my journey on moving to the UK, England in specific. After living in Canada and the US all of my life, I've moved back to England, and this is my story. So come along with me. So, why would an American want to move to the UK for safety? Who do we think has a better record, and who do we think has a safer country, the US or the UK? Well, let's find out. Of course, this topic wouldn't be complete without talking about gun control, which is very much a thing here in Europe and not so much in the US. In fact, the US is a little bit of an outlier in terms of not having much gun control, and it seems like things are almost going in the opposite direction. While there are some states that do have gun control, the majority of the states don't. So let's find out where that leaves you in terms of safety. So in the UK, guns just aren't permitted. I mean, only under certain circumstances. So you're not allowed to have a handgun, those are banned. You're not allowed to have a fully automatic submachine gun, those are expressly prohibited. You're certainly not allowed to have a semi-automatic rifle, which can only be sometimes permitted to use to, let's say, put a dying animal or an injured animal out of its misery. Sporting rifles and shotguns are allowed for sport with a license. In fact, even in the police don't have routinely carry weapons here in the UK. So I think people feel a little bit safer because, nobody's packing heat and they don't feel like they have to defend themselves. The US actually is the only nation where guns outnumber people. That's not a good statistic. There are 120.5 guns per 100 people. That is crazy. Versus the UK, where there's a little less than 5 guns per 100 people. So that sort of speaks volumes about where guns are in society here. Gun deaths in the US so far this year, which is this May of 2023, are already almost 14,000. And that includes 184 mass shootings so far this year. Unfortunately, half of those, or more than half of those gun deaths, are suicide. So people are not only creating violence towards others, but also towards themselves, which is really sad. By contrast, gun deaths in the UK so far in 2023 number 162. So I can see, or you can see, that we are much safer in terms of not being shot on the streets here in the UK. But what about the overall crime rate here in the UK and in the US for that matter? Well, surprisingly, the numbers are a little bit of a draw. I was kind of surprised at that. I thought, well, with no guns, the UK surely would rank better than the US, but actually it's just below the US. So there's a ranking system where countries are ranked. One is the best, and then the higher number, one is the worst, and then the higher number is the best. So the UK ranks at number 64 with a crime index of 46.7, and the US ranks at 56 with a crime index of 47.8. So what does that mean? Well, it just means we're kind of in the middle of the pack, both of us. Neither one is that much, safer than the other. What about the big cities? Like London and New York, for example. They both have populations of about 8 million. Certainly they have the very high-end wealthy folks and the other lower-end poor folks all living together in one big city. How does that translate? Well, again, I couldn't find any definitive numbers to say one was worse than the other. They are in about a dead heat. They both have similar crime statistics. I think New York has the slight edge because it's actually been pulling down its crime rate since 2007. It's got a really great record on reducing overall crime, which is, kudos to them for doing that. London's crime rate has stayed kind of the same, and I think it's even maybe ticked up a little bit recently due to increased knife crime. That's the thing here, is knives, not guns. But if you look at the overall statistics for safest countries in the world, and not just talking about crime, but talking about a lot of other things too, like, what makes a country safe? Well, it's having a higher standard of living, for one thing. It's having a social safety net and good education. Peace is also a factor because nobody wants to be at war, and a country that is at peace is considered safe. And of course, low crime and a feeling of security. So, those are all the elements that go into making a country safe. And ranking these countries, the US and the UK come in at very different places on this ranking. So, for example, the first country on the list, the very safest country, is Iceland, followed closely at number 2 position by New Zealand. So, where do we think the UK comes in? Well, it comes in at 34. So, 34th safest country in the world. Not too bad, not stellar, and it's actually kind of ticked down one number since 2021. But by contrast, the US, by these criteria, this umbrella of things that make you feel safe or make a safe country, the US comes in at 129th country in the world for being safe. Boom. That's not a good statistic to have. Consider that Mexico is the bottom of the list, considered the least safe country in the world, and that's 137. So definitely the UK wins that one. That is not a good place for the US to be as a wealthy, developed nation. And that made me think, well, what is the safest country for women to be in, for example? And actually, the US ranks 7th for most dangerous places for women travelers. Eek. And of course, we all know there's 50 states. You've got a wide variety of situations and conditions and places. We can't say every state or the whole country is bad. There are certainly, this is just an overall statistic that gives you some idea that you could be a danger. And by contrast, the UK is at number 12 on that list, so it doesn't exactly get a gold star either. That kind of surprised me because I certainly do feel safe here in England. But according to Reuters, the US is the most dangerous place for women to live. Yikes. And this is, again, a wealthy, developed country in the Western world. And it comes after Nigeria at number 9. So, it's not the top of the list. It's not number 1. But even so, number 10 is not a good place to be here. And there's no other Western country in that top 10 list of most dangerous places for women. So, again, I'm afraid that sexual violence and different forms of sexual violence are the main driving factor for these statistics, especially in the US. So what other ways could we feel safe or unsafe? Well, certainly on our roads. I've done a little video recently about my trip back to the US, and I talked about, driving in Boston and how it's still, people put the pedal to the metal and they just go for it. They go through red lights, they cross intersections, they overtake you very dangerously. And that kind of attitude is reflected in the numbers. So there are 46,000 traffic deaths per year in the US. That works out to about 12.4 deaths per 100,000 people. Not a good statistic, not at all. And by contrast, the UK's numbers come in much lower. So in the UK, there's only about 3 deaths per 100,000. In fact, it's considered one of the top 10 safest places in the world by population for drivers. And that could be due to, I did another video on passing my driving test here, which was extremely strenuous, to say the least. And maybe it pays off. Or maybe the fact is the cars are, you don't have the big powerful cars here with the big powerful engines. Or maybe people are just more considerate here and more polite. I think that's probably the answer. But whatever it is, I think you can agree that if we are looking at the US versus the UK, which place is safest, I think UK definitely has the edge here. And if you're a gun control advocate, as I am, you'll definitely feel much safer here. And you will agree with the general population who also wants to have gun control. And quite frankly, if you're not a gun control advocate, you probably wouldn't want to live here anyway. So I think there's a lot of things that go into making a country feel safe, and I certainly do feel safe here. I really have to say I really do. And it's a good feeling to have, especially as a woman. So, any comments or questions, I'd love to see them. Put them below, and I will try to answer them all. And of course, I so much appreciate you watching. I hope to see you on the next video, and I will see you soon. Bye for now.